You've probably heard all the hype, right? AI is changing everything. It picks your movies, it drives cars. So why can't it perfect a life-saving drug? Well, today we're going beyond the black box to see why that Silicon Valley dream is hitting a hard wall on the pharmaceutical factory floor and what incredible new approach is rising from the ashes.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the problem. See, a recommendation engine works with tons of digital data, but a bioreactor, that's about physics. It's about chemistry, biology, fluid dynamics, real physical stuff happening in a giant steel tank. It is an entirely different universe, and that's the disconnect we really need to get our heads around. All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start by looking at that hype versus reality gap. Then we'll cover the two old school models and why they don't work. After that, we'll get to the main event, the gray box solution. We'll see how it's made scale-aware, look at it in action, and wrap up with what this all means for the future. Okay, let's dive right in. You know the pitch from a lot of AI companies? It's super tempting. Just pour all your historical data into our magical black box and poof, instant optimization. But on the plant floor, that promise is falling completely flat. And the reason why is actually surprisingly simple. It all comes down to data, or really a lack of it. The kind of AI that powers Google or Netflix, well, it feasts on big data. We're talking millions, even billions of data points to learn from. But in pharma, each single batch is wildly expensive and can take weeks to produce. You're not dealing with big data, you're dealing with small data. And for a generic AI, that's a fatal weakness. So get this. A process engineer might only have data from, say, 12 to 15 successful batches. Now just imagine trying to predict the weather for an entire year based on only 2 weeks of data. You'd get it spectacularly wrong, right? You'd miss the seasons entirely. That's exactly what happens here. It's a classic case of overfitting, where the AI isn't actually learning, it's just memorizing the random noise in that tiny data set. That leads to predictions that are not just wrong, but dangerously wrong. So if pure AI is out, what have people been using instead? Well, this brings us to the two traditional ways of doing things. And you'll see pretty quickly that you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, you have the black box. This is your pure AI. Think of it as a brilliant statistician who's never taken a single physics class. It's incredible at finding patterns in numbers, but it has absolutely no idea that mass can't just vanish into thin air. It doesn't get the rules of the real world. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have the white box. This is your pure physics model. Think of a genius physicist who's never set foot in a messy, real-world factory. It knows all the laws of nature perfectly, but it's way too rigid. It can't handle the unpredictable, noisy reality of a manufacturing process. So we've got this blind oracle on one side and a rigid, by-the-book engineer on the other. Neither one can solve the problem alone. But what if we could take the best of both? What if we could get them to work together? That is the incredible, elegant idea behind the gray box. Now, the technical name is a bit of a mouthful. Hybrid semi-parametric modeling, but the concept is actually beautiful. You start with what we call a wrapper of fundamental physics. These are the non-negotiable laws, like conservation of mass and energy. Think of them as the guardrails that the model can't violate. But then, and this is the magic, you find all the rigid, old-fashioned assumptions inside those equations, and you replace them with small, nimble machine learning models that can actually learn from data. So you're literally getting the best of both worlds. You have a model that is fundamentally grounded in reality. It has to obey the laws of physics, but it also has the flexibility to learn and adapt to the subtle, messy details of your actual process data. It's like giving that genius physicist a superpowered, data-savvy lab assistant. Okay, that sounds really smart, right? But how does this gray box model actually solve that massive problem of scaling up a process from the lab to the factory? Well, the secret isn't just in the model's architecture, it's in the data you feed it. It's about creating what we call a digital nameplate for the process. Here's the trick. You have to stop telling the AI simple things, like the speed of a mixer in RPM. I mean, think about it. 500 RPM in your kitchen blender is a totally different universe from 500 RPM in a 20,000-liter tank the size of a car. It's a meaningless number across scales. Instead, you feed the AI metrics that are independent of scale, things derived from deep physics simulations like computational fluid dynamics, or CFD. You can think of CFD as being like an MRI for your reactor. It lets you see all the invisible forces at play inside. So the theory sounds incredible, but the real question is, does it actually work out in the wild? Well, let's look at two real-world case studies where this gray box approach is already delivering game-changing results. First up, a classic pharma headache: growing a complex culture of living mammalian cells in a bioreactor. You're trying to keep millions of tiny, living things happy. They're divas. The slightest change can ruin the whole batch. This is where the gray box really gets to shine.
So here's how all those pieces we talked about come together. First, that physics wrapper is doing the basic accounting. It's tracking how many cells there are, how much food they've eaten, the basics. Then the CFD data provides that MRI view, mapping out the invisible world inside the tank. It shows the precise shear forces right near the impeller that can shred cells, and it can even see these tiny invisible pH plumes where adding acid can stress the cells out. And finally, the machine learning kernels connect the dots. They take that CFD map and the real batch data and they learn the biological response, predicting not just cell growth, but cell damage and even dangerous metabolic shifts before they happen. It's a true digital twin.
All right, so we've seen it work for living cells. Now let's switch gears to pure chemistry and see how the exact same architecture can be applied to a totally different challenge: crystallizing a small molecule drug.
And this is just a brilliant showcase of the model's flexibility. Here, one of those ML kernels is using CFD data about shear stress to predict exactly when and where a delicate drug crystal might fracture. Another one predicts how quickly chemicals are mixing to avoid creating these nasty, hard-to-remove things called zombie impurities. I just love that name. But this last one is maybe the most impressive. A machine learning kernel can actually learn how the unique impurity fingerprint from a new batch of raw materials will change the drug's properties. That is something a pure physics model could never, ever hope to do. So we've seen this gray box model master complex biology and complex chemistry. What's the big picture takeaway here? What does this all really mean for the future of making medicine? Well, it's a shift that is both simple and absolutely profound. We are making the leap from being historians to being prophets. Think about it. For decades, we've just been looking at past data, trying to draw a line through it and hope for the best. That's curve fitting. Now we are building models that have such a deep, fundamental understanding of the process that they can accurately predict what's going to happen next. This is a seismic shift in how we engineer medicines. And that really brings us to the ultimate question, the one that changes everything. What if you could take all the expensive, time-consuming guesswork out of developing a new drug? What if you could design a process in the lab and know, with certainty, that it will work perfectly at commercial scale on the very first try? That's the future this new paradigm unlocks. And believe me, that future is a lot closer than you might think.